So, hello and welcome to my chess tutorial here. In this video I want to show you, you can read that, how the pieces are moving, what's the value of them, the goal of the game. Well, the goal of the game is checkmate, but what is checkmate, and basic checkmates, and some basic tactics, and how a game should be played. So, first of all, we look at the pieces and pawns, because pawns are not pieces. Anyway, the pawn, it can only go forward, as you see there in the first, on the starting position. So on the second rank it can go 2 steps forward, and later on only 1 step forward, and it's taking diagonally. There is also something called en passant, but I won't explain that here, that's a little bit more advanced, but I will put the link in the description below what en passant is. Okay, the knight, as you see there, it can reach 8 different squares when it's in the center, and it's going 1 square straight and 1 square diagonal, and this in every direction. So in the center it can reach 8 different squares, in the corner only 2, and somewhere on the rim only 4. So yeah, that's the knight, and it's the only piece which can jump above other pieces or pawns. Okay, the bishop, as you see there, it can only go diagonally. So if you have a bishop on a dark squared bishop, you can only reach dark squares, never light squares, because it's going diagonally. And a light square bishop can never reach a dark square because of the same reason. Now we have the rook. The rook goes straight and sidewise, and the queen, it's like the combination of bishop and rook. It can go diagonally, sidewise and straight, and this in every direction as far as she wants to. The king, it can only go, it's like a queen, but it can only go 1 step in every direction. Okay, the value of the pieces, a pawn is 1 point. Those are the general values of the pieces, because in some positions a pawn is much more than 1 point, and in some position much less. Anyway, these are the general values of the pieces. Pawn 1 point, a knight 3 points, a bishop 3 to 3.5 points, a rook 4.5 to 5 points, a queen 9 to 9.5 points, and a king infinity, because if you lose the king you lose the game. And this can help you to kind of give the position a value or evaluation, to evaluate the position, because if you're like 2 pawns down, the position of your opponent is probably better, and if you're a queen down, then the same thing, the position of your opponent would be much better in most of the cases. So this will help you to evaluate positions, but there are also other things you have to take into consideration about a position, but I just want to give you some basic. Okay, the goal of the game, as we said, is checkmate. Checkmate is when you attack the king, for example with your queen, and the queen is protected, and if the king is on the rim somewhere or in the corner, then if you put the queen in front of him and king or pawn is defending the queen, then it's checkmate, because the king has nowhere to go, as you see there, and the queen is attacking the king or puts it in check. Also, you can give a checkmate with a rook. This looks like that. The king is taking away all the squares from the king, from the other king, and the rook is attacking the king and controls this whole diagonal, rank in that case. So those are 2 examples of checkmates. checkmates can also appear during the game when there are still pawns and pieces around. You can also sometimes checkmate your opponent. Checkmate is when the king is attacked and has nowhere to go, as it is in those two cases you see there. And those are the only pieces you can mate the king in an end game. When you only have one bishop, you can never mate the king. When you only have a knight, you can never mate the king. When you have a queen, you can mate the king. When you have a rook, you can mate the king. When you have two bishops, you can mate the king. When you have two knights, you cannot force to mate the king. And when you have a knight and a bishop, you can also force checkmate. But that's for advanced players. With two bishops, it's easier with knight and bishop, but still very hard for beginners probably. But with rook and queen, it's kind of simple, and I will show you how this will work later on. Here I want to show you the most basic checkmate in chess. This is with the queen and the king against the king. This is very simple. You just have to bring the king closer to this king, the queen also closer to the king, and then mate him somewhere on the back rank. Somewhere here or somewhere here, it doesn't really matter. So let's just start. I know there are faster ways probably, but I am just gonna do something, bring the king closer, and now deliver the first check of the game. Again, now cutting him off, so he is in a little box, can only use those squares here. So let's see what he chooses. Goes here. I'm again cutting him off. Now he has two squares. We have to be careful about stalemates. I will explain the stalemate later. So now he has only those two squares where he can go to, so now the simple thing is bring the king here or there, and then deliver mate over here, for example. So let's do that. So there he goes in the corner and I deliver checkmate. A stalemate would be, for example, this new variation. It's a Patt, this is German for stalemate. The king is not in check and he has nowhere to go, and therefore it's stalemate. It's not always stalemate when it's this kind of configuration, because if black still has a pawn which he can push or a piece which he can push, then it's of course not stalemate. But okay, I will show you some stalemate positions in the next video. So here I want to show you now a checkmate with the rook. So first we have to see that the king is comes closer to that king here, and we always have to make a opposition. For example, he's running away, of course, and now I'm gonna go here because I want to checkmate him somewhere on those squares here. So let's see, now I can give him a check. All those squares are covered, so he has to go to this rank here, to the 6th rank. Let's see, he goes there, of course. Now I go here. Now I'm changing the rook's place so that if he goes there, I can go here, just waiting to see what he's doing. If he goes there, then I'm giving the check and he has to go back again. So he will probably run away. No, he goes there. Now I give a check. He has to go to the 7th rank. And now again. Now if he goes there, he has to go back then after the check. So he's probably running away. I'm gonna go follow him. And here you see, because here you see again this pattern. And now I give this check, he has to go to the 1st rank, Now I go here. If he goes there, then he's made it, so he's probably gonna run away. I'm gonna follow him. If he goes there, then he's made it, so he's coming closer to my rook. I go there. He goes here. If I go there now, he goes to d8, and I cannot deliver checkmate, so I'm just gonna play a waiting move. Now if he goes there, then this is indeed checkmate, so he's gonna run. I'm gonna follow him, and now I go there, and he is kind of in Zugzwang. Anyway, if he's not moving, he's made it anyway, but now he has to go there, and I deliver checkmate because the king is cutting him off. Okay, this was the mate with the rook, so see you later. So here I want to just show you some basic chess tactics. Here, as we said, if the king has nowhere to go and he is in check, then it's a mate and the game is over, and the side delivering the checkmate is winning the game. And here there is a checkmate and 2 moves, because the bishop is covering the escape square, and therefore rook here will be checkmate after the rook blocks. So I'm gonna do that. That's the first puzzle. Okay, here we have different sort of thing. This knight is undefended, but we can just take it. Undefended pieces are falling off. This knight is covering the escape square, so the same thing than before. Now white has to give up the knight and black is delivering checkmate. Okay, taking the pawn would result in losing the knight, but we can just take the rook because the knight covers this square here, and now white is just winning. Loose pieces are falling off. So let's see what we have here. There is this check, which is a mate because the king has nowhere to go. The knight is blocking the escape square, and even if this knight is not there, this knight covers the square, so queen here is checkmate. Pawn here. Here there is also a nice little checkmate. Pawn here. Only square for the king is to go there, and then the rook delivers a checkmate over here. So let's do that. Now the bishop is under attack, but the king and the rook are in the same diagonal, so we can check the king and take the rook. Now this pawn is close to queening, but the rook can just defend against the queening square. So this is nice because the bishop is covering the escape square, so knight here check would be mate. If not, the pawn can take the knight. But I'm gonna still play this because after the pawn takes the knight, then the rook delivers a mate over here because the pawn is not there anymore, and the rook delivers check, and the escape square is covered from the bishop. So I'm gonna do that, and here, I mean, I have 8 seconds left, so I'm just gonna play it fast. I'm gonna give this check, give that check, only square is this, and now I'm giving that check over there. The king has only 1 square left to go to, this one, and then I can give a check, take the pawn, and deliver mate. So yeah, these were 8 puzzles, just to show you how this game can work on a basic level. So yeah, hope you learned something out of it. So here just a short game. It was a blitz game between Lila Sea Fish from the 1st of April 2021 versus Greco from the 31st of March 2020. Lila Sea Fish is a neural network based engine, and Greco is some kind of AB engine. If you're interested in those stuff, you can read this on the internet. I won't explain it now. And Lila Sea Fish was running on 8 cores, and Greco is an engine which is running on 1 core. And Lila Sea Fish is one of the best chess engines in the world. Greco is just some kind of sparring partner, maybe a rating of around 2500 or something. I don't know, maybe, probably less. And Lila Sea Fish, something around 3500 or even 3600. But you can look this up on CCRL on Google. CCRL, Computer Chess Rating List. So yeah, it was a 7-minute plus a 7-second increment game, played on my laptop with an AMD Ryzen 7 4700U. The benchmark, the chess benchmark, you will see later. I will put some words there as well. But anyway, let's go to the game. d4, one of the most usual moves in chess. Just controls the center, puts a pawn in the center, and opens up the bishop's diagonal and a little bit also the queen. So this is the queen's pawn opening. Black replied with d5, or I have let them reply with d5. And now we have c4, the queen's gambit. The thing about this is that black is not winning a pawn here because of, yeah, taking is, you can take this pawn, but you can't keep this pawn after e3, because if you try, for example, b5, then a4 hitting the pawn, and if this is taken, then rook takes or queen takes, and probably queen takes, and then this pawn can't be defended and it's attacked 2 times. So therefore c6, for example, but c6 is losing material because you cannot take back the pawn here, because after b takes, c takes b5, we have queen f3 hitting the rook, and there is no good way of defending the rook, so black would lose material. Also after a4, if a6 is played, then you can just grab the pawn, and black cannot take back because the rook in the corner again would hang. For example, if black takes, then you just take the rook, and if not, then the bishop would grab the pawn, probably, yeah, and you already got back your pawn. So black cannot hold on to the pawn, therefore knight f6 is one of the main moves. I've let them play this, and after bishop takes, c6, e6. Okay, it's blocking in the bishop, but it's blocking in the bishop, but it's also directed against queen b3 stuff, hitting f7 and also b7. For example, if the bishop comes out too early, then queen b3 would be a double attack and black would lose material. So that's why e6 is one of the main moves. Also preparing to move the bishop out somewhere on this diagonal. Knight f3, just developing, also getting more control of the center. a6, maybe at some point preparing b5 to kick the bishop and to give this bishop a very good diagonal here. Castles, it's always important, as I already mentioned, to have the king not in the center but rather somewhere in the corner, either here or here, or even more far in the corner. As far in the corner the better, kind of, sorry for my bad English. But anyway, here we have b5 hitting the bishop, bishop moves back to d3, bishop b7, queen e2, just developing the queen, preparing e4. If white gets this e4 in, then he would have a very good control over the center, and as we already discussed, that's very important in chess. c5, so now e4 is not possible because you would lose the d pawn. So therefore white just grabs it, and now bishop takes c5. That's kind of a mistake. Bishop takes f3 would have been better, and after attacking the queen and also taking a piece, so you should probably, most of the time you should recapture if something is captured of you. So here it's clear, you just take the bishop, hitting the undefended rook, so knight d7. The reason why I said knight bd7 is the other knight can come to d7 as well, so that's why you always, if both pieces or both rooks or both knights can reach the same square, you always tell them which knight you mean by telling the other guy the starting position. So therefore knight b d7, because there is a b, but we already discussed this. So then rook d1, aligning the rook with the queen, so that's always useful. So for example, if knight takes pawn, this would be a terrible blunder, because after bishop takes b5 check, the rook is also attacking the queen. So this is a discovered attack on the queen and black is lost. But bishop takes c5, and yeah, the position is probably slightly better for white, but nothing special. Chances for both sides. White will probably continue development with knight c3, b3, bishop b2. Black will bring the king into safety with castles, and then try and bring the rooks to the open files, and yeah, game continues. But okay, we have bishop c5, and here there is a little tactic which Leela Seafish of course played. Bishop takes b5. The reason this is working is because after a takes b5, it's not like white just blundered the piece. Queen takes comes with check, and it's also a double attack on both bishops, both undefended bishops. Undefended pieces fall off, so therefore white just won 2 pawns, because white will get the piece back next move, whatever black plays. So therefore black didn't take the bishop, rather plays knight bd7, and after bishop d3 back, because now this was a threat, because the knight is covering the bishop, and if you don't move the bishop back in that position, then black would just grab it, and after queen takes attacking the bishop, black can just defend the bishop with one of those moves, and this bishop is also covered by the knight, and it's also blocking the check. So therefore white just retreats the piece. It's kind of a gambit that black did here, because white is a little bit undeveloped, so black has some compensation for it. Very strong bishops here on this diagonals, and a little bit ahead in development, but yeah, the material white gained is somewhat more important in that position, because white's king is already safe, and to break up this formation here on the king side to really attack white's king, there is no way. So white stands clearly better here. White will continue with something like this, but you will see that in the game continuation. So black castles, knight bd2. Again, knight f d2 was also possible, but it doesn't make sense to bring this knight back, because this knight is already very well placed here in the center, and this knight can also jump to some central squares later on, and it's also controlling the e4 square. So very nice. And as you might know by now, you should always bring your pieces out, and here it's the knight here is much better than the knight on b1. But anyway, we have queen c7, also developing, connecting rooks. So now those rooks are connected. That's also important in chess, so that you can freely move the other pieces around, put the rooks into the center or on open or half open files. These are open files. This is a half open file because there is still a pawn. Those are closed files, because the rook is looking at his own pawn, and even if this is gone, then it's only looking at another pawn. So those are closed files. And rooks belong on open files, and if there are no open files, then they belong on half open files most of the time. Of course, there are some positions where that's not the case, but most of the time rook belong on open or half open files. So a5 stopping b4, but to kick the bishop and with tempo, and use this b2 square and this diagonal for his own bishop. Therefore we have b3, and now a4 hitting the pawns, but now b4 hitting the bishop with tempo, so now the bishop moves and white is again to move, kind of. With tempo means that you hit a piece, let's say you hit the queen has to move, most of the time yes, the queen has to move, let's say, and then it's again your move, so you get like 2 moves instead of 1. So okay, bishop that, so now white also has some very strong bishops, and white is still up a pawn and has a passed b pawn, which can also be very important later on. If the game lasts longer, then this pawn might become a queen or a knight or a bishop or a rook, most of the time a queen, of course. But anyway, we have a3 hitting the bishop, but rook c1 hitting the queen, and as we already know, the queen is much more important than the bishop. So queen d8, and now bishop back to a1. Queen e7, rerouting the bishop, rerouting the queen. So now the position is kind of symmetrical, but white has an extra pawn, so white stands, yeah, better here. e4, that's often the goal. You want to push those pawns in the center, and now there are already threats of e5 to fork those pieces, and as we know, a pawn is less important than a piece, so this is a threat because it would attack both pieces. So therefore knight h5, going out of the way. But okay, this is not a very strong knight, but it was threatening to come to f4 to fork queen and bishop, and also a knight on f4 is most of the time very strong, so therefore would also hit the g2 pawn, and if, for example, the queen somehow lands here or here, then there are mate threats. Also this bishop is looking on g2, this bishop is looking there, so knight f4 was kind of a threat, so therefore g3, taking away this square and also securing the king's position a little bit more. And now there are no back rank mates anymore because the king has an escape square. And yeah, most of the time this setup is, if the pawn is still back on g2, this setup here is much more stable, but this is also a very stable setup here. There are some holes here, some weaknesses with the bishop lining on this diagonal, but it's you cannot really exploit this in that position. Some positions yes, but anyway, this is for more advanced players. Also h3 is in some positions a useful move to give the king an escape square and to take away this g5 square. But anyway, so e5, taking away the e5 move for white, but blocking in his own bishop, so you always have to be careful about such moves. Now we have knight c4, hitting the bishop, and also bringing the knight to a more useful central square. Knight a5, and now really hitting a bishop because this piece is undefended, therefore rook a b8. Defending the bishop, and now pushing the passed pawn. Passed pawns should be pushed most of the time. And now knight c5 hitting the bishop, and now this exchange sacrifice. But it's a very strong exchange, because if the bishop takes, you also get a pawn for it, and now you have this passed pawn, and you can also push with on the king side here if this pawn is not pinned anymore. But anyway, so rook there, because now the queen is also covering this bishop, so that's why this is justified. So knight takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and knight c6, sorry. This knight here is a monster. It really controls a lot of squares here. It's an octopus knight, as we say in chess. Yeah. And that's the justification of the exchange sacrifice plus the pawn you already gotten. So now white has 2 pawns for the exchange and a very, very strong knight on c6, and you will see this later on. So if the queen, for example, moves away from this 7th rank, then there is already this checking option, getting back the exchange and be up 2 pawns with a completely winning position. Also, white has a bishop pair here. This is also some kind of justification for the exchange sacrifice. So there is a lot of compensation for the exchange, and in fact white is standing much better in this position. Okay, knight d7, because there was also the threat of bishop takes knight, ruining black's pawn structure, but not only ruining the pawn structure, but ruining the pawn structure around black's king. So for example, if you play anything here, let's see that move, then bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight, and now those pawns are isolated, means they cannot be defended by other pawns, so therefore they are weak and easy to attack. For example, with something like queen f3, immediately going after that pawn. But there are also other options here, for example e5, queen here, and already threatening some e5, queen h5, and already threatening some checkmating ideas over here. There is also this checking option, looking at the rook. If this rook ever moves, and this rook also, and this queen also moves, so this would be bad for black. Therefore the knight just moved out of the way. Now we have rook d1. Still, this bishop is covering the pawn, this pawn is covering the knight. And something I wanted to mention, if this bishop is, for example, on c4, then this rook wouldn't be defended, so rook takes knight would be possible, because after pawn takes knight, the queen can take the rook. But in that case, the queen is covering the rook. But anyway, so knight d7, now rook d1, f6. It's kind of a bad move. You shouldn't, most of the time f6 is a bad move, and here Lila Fish will just show you why. First it starts with this check, king h8, and now bishop here, double attack on the knight, so now the knight here is threatened, therefore rook c7 defending the knight, and now bishop here. This is a nice maneuver. Rook here, bishop here, bishop there, and bishop there, eyeing this h7 square, and now there will be a very strong attack. So rook a8, kind of a nonsense move in my opinion, but black's position is already very hard to play. What do you want to play here? That's the reason why this knight is very strong here. Also this bishop, this rook is strong, this bishop is strong, everything white has is very strong, and black's pieces, except this one maybe, are really tied up by this lonely knight there, because the rook can't go there, can't go there. This square is also covered for the pieces. The queen can't go here to eye this square maybe, and if it goes there, then the knight would fall. So black is really tied down. So rook a8, but as I said, it's hard to suggest something better here for black. Rook takes d7, another exchange sacrifice, and this time it's really crushing, because after rook takes we have queen here, threatening checkmate. Because the king has nowhere to go after queen takes h7. Therefore g6. It seems so that black is now winning a piece and has taken care of this checkmate, but just bishop takes here, and if king g8, then you just give that check while taking the bishop, and the king is in the mating net. As you see there, this check is just for nothing, and here you see the value of this knight. It really controls everything here around the king. It controls this escape square. Okay, the bishop also covers this escape square, but the bishop wants to go here. Then the threat is queen here checkmate, and the knight is still covering that square, so the king can't run away. So yeah, knight on c6 is very strong most of the time. So queen g7, now just knight here, and that's just a huge position, making room for the queen to come to c6 to fork the king and the rook. And it's not only a fork, it's just a mate, and black can't do anything against this because the square is covered. And if you move the rook, where do you want to move it? This square, okay, let's move it there, but it's already pretty busted because now you just have knight f7, and there is really no defense against queen e7 mate. The bishop is covering this escape square, the queen is covering this escape square, and this bishop covering that escape square, and also covers the knight, and giving up the queen is just nonsense. So therefore, let's say rook here, attack this pawn, rook here, attack the a2 pawn to create a passed pawn. Maybe you can get a queen, but in that case, of course, it's just dead. This is checkmate. But anyway, bishop f6, and now we have rook there, and now everything is pinned, as you see there. You cannot take with the rook because it's pinned to the king, and you cannot take with the pawn because it's pinned to the king. And now again, this is a threat because the rook is pinned. So queen h7 is checkmate. Therefore king g8. But now queen here, check. King back. And now bishop here. And this is really, yeah, black can't do anything. Bishop d6, saving the bishop. But now just e5. And yeah, black just can't do anything here. There is no useful move black can do. So rook there, not even attacking something. So queen here, attacking the rook. Therefore queen here, defending the rook. But it's just a matter of time now. Bishop e6, attacking the queen, and now just look at this position. Those pieces, yeah, black is up 2 exchanges, but it's really, there is no way black can save this game. It's completely lost. King g2, just slowly improving the position of the king, going out of this pin. So now f4 can be played at some point, queen e8, pinning the knight, and yeah, not really doing anything. Bishop takes rook, taking back 1 exchange, queen takes, queen here check, bishop here and bishop there. And there is no defense against this checkmate. So well, there are some kind of attempts, but black has to give back the exchange, the last one, but after bishop, queen takes, white is just up 4 pawns. So in that position, black resign. Okay, this is how a chess game can run. This is how you play chess on a very, very, very high level anyway. But here you see some ideas, and I hope I presented you this as such. So thank you very much. See you later.